Welcome to my show, The 80s Ain't Dead Yet, and I'm your host, Michelle Rockstar Steele. And today, we're going to talk about identity. So don't worry, we are going to start talking with some guests, but for now, until I get my crap together and figure out all this technology stuff, you're going to have to just stick with me for a while, okay? So identity is something I think we all struggle with, but I have kind of a different story. And some of you may know my story, some of you may not. But it starts with, I guess, who are we? Who do we belong to? What do we connect to? Who do we look like? Where are we from? You know, so most of us, you know, we were born into a family. We are mom and dad's kids or whatever, and you're just who you are. You know, well, when I was a kid, I literally was like, did not at all, from the very beginning, ever felt like I belonged. Not that my family, my mom and dad, my siblings, they never made me feel like I did not belong. By all means, it's not like that. It's just, there was something that was different. I knew it from the very, very beginning. There was something that was different. And people would say something like, what nationality are you? Is that your baby? Are you adopted? Is what they would ask my mother. So mind you, my mother was a short little redhead. My real mother was a short little redhead. Irish, mainly Irish, lots of other European, but Irish. And that's where I get my spark. But anyway, and my dad thought he was probably a Native American. So you blend that look, I guess, and you get me, right? Okay. So my mom's family had almond-shaped eyes. So as an Irish redhead white person, you know, and I had an aunt that actually had a dark hair and the almond-shaped eyes. So we thought, well, maybe somewhere along the line there might have been some Asian down the road, but nobody knew and nobody would talk about it. And if I asked my great-grandmother, she would change the subject about the weather. So it was just like, you know, back then you don't talk about stuff like that. So I was like, oh, I don't know, maybe something down down the way there was some sort of Asian descent. I don't know, on my mom's side, mind you, on my mom's side. Okay, I had no doubt. Like, dad was my dad. You know, I mean, I had dark hair. I was the only one that probably looked the most like my father, with the dark hair, brown eyes, and not that my one sister has brown eyes and stuff like that, but I had the same little cowlick in the back of my head as my dad. We had these little dimples on the back of right at the top of our butts, by our back, that were exactly the same. I have a temper like my dad. I was just a lot like my dad, okay? So no, there wasn't like a question. Like, so I'm going to school, and as a kindergartner, I remember going into school, and mind you, I went to a small school in Nebraska at the time, and so grade school, clear to high school, they're all in the same building, you know. So you go to lunch, and I'm sitting there constantly being made fun of, you know. I don't remember if you guys remember this. Chinese, Japanese, dirty knees, look at these. That was said to me quite often and made fun of. You have to be adopted. You're like, you don't look like your parents, blah, 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 you know. And I would sit there and just ask my mom and dad, am I adopted? They're like, Michelle, no. What are you talking about? You are not adopted. I don't know what. And then one time, and like I said, this was something that I was made fun of quite often. I would be horrified going to school. I remember going even home with a certain friend's family, and their siblings would make fun of me the whole way home because I looked different. Things were way different back then than they are now. Like, different looks were way more accepted now than they are back then. I remember, well, we'll get to that part, but I just remember being made fun of quite often, being in tears, and just thinking that maybe I wasn't my mom and dad's, and I didn't belong, and I don't look like my sister, and I don't know. And my mom made a very good effort to always, me and my sister Heather, we're only like 18 months apart. And she would dress us exactly like my mom sewed. So we all always had the same outfits on all the time. And she's like, oh my gosh, don't they look alike? Whatever. And my dad, he would like, oh my gosh, doesn't she look like a Clapp? That was our maiden name. Make fun of it. I thought it was cool at the time when I was a kid. I was like, Michelle Clapp, okay? But we can all say something different later, but whatever. At the time when I was a kid, I thought it was cool. And I struggled with it because people made fun of me, but my family was so amazing. They never made me feel that way at all, and they assured me I was theirs. They're like, no. And then one time I saw an after-school special where, do you remember the after-school specials, my 80s friends? What's your favorite 80s after-school special? Tell me. Just comment on about that. But anyway, my worst one was the one where she found out, she looked in through the drawers and she found the adoption papers that she was adopted. So sure enough, I go and look at my mom and dad's drawers. I got to be adopted. I have to be adopted. And they were just like, Michelle, would you quit it? You are not adopted. Look at you. Look how much you are like your dad. My dad would say the same thing. Michelle, quit it. I mean, he would tell me things like, I would be like, why am I so tall? And they're like, well, my uncle was tall, my dad said, and I mean, they always just made me reassured that I was theirs, and I was silly to even think anything different. But all my childhood life, I was always asked what nationality I was, and they made fun of it like it was a bad thing to look Asian, and I just, like I said, assumed that it was just something that popped out of a genetic, trait on my mother's side, and then you mixed it with a Native American, and you got me, So I didn't know. I mean, I was assured for them, but it made me feel different, I didn't feel like I belonged. It's a real thing when people don't understand unless they've been in your shoes. Like when you don't feel like you look like somebody, you feel unloved or unaccepted, So it's a very real thing to not feel that way. And I think it was way worse back in the 80s. Correct me if I'm wrong, because I think nowadays it's way more different. I mean, you see mixed families and things like that all the time. But again, remember, I wasn't. I was my mom and dad's child, their oldest child. I was the reason my hippie mom and dad got married, and my dad was, he came back from the Vietnam War. He met my mother. They had the most amazing love story. They courted back and forth. And then when my mom graduated, she went to she was talked into going to Vermont to go to a place to go work at a resort and make some really good money waiting tables or something like that. I don't know the exact complete story. I just remember my mom talking about it as in a very negative way, but I remember hearing this story. And my dad at the time was, he did agricultural stuff and did combining and things like that. So he was gone a lot, harvesting and stuff like that. But they were like back and forth. I still have the love letters. They're so amazing. My dad sent love letters to my mother in Vermont. They would get sent back because my mom wasn't there anymore or whatever. She never sent them back. But I mean, they're beautiful. My dad, if you knew my dad, he was a very gruff type of guy, but he was so sweet to my mother and the beautiful things he would say. And he was just so in love. And he said some of the craziest things like far out and, just like those 70s things. It was just so cute. But I cherish those letters. But that's where that love started, was then. And apparently, something very bad happened when my mother was in Vermont that she said that they were accusing her of being drugs or something like that. And like, mind you, she was a high school, just graduated, and had to hurry back from Vermont and asked my mom, my grandmother and grandfather to pick her up from the airport because she wasn't going to work there anymore. And she was very, 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 something bad had happened. It just very much affected her. So she left there. And then then she was pregnant, and my mom and dad got together she was, dad and my mom and dad got pregnant, and they got married. I can say this now, there was a lot of controversy. I mean, obviously back then, being an unwed mother was a very horrible thing. I mean, it's never a good thing, I understand, but back then it was way less accepted. And my grandfather, bless his heart, I love my grandmother and grandfather, so I'm not saying anything negative. I'm just telling you my story. But my grandfather was a pastor, and it was very shameful for a daughter of theirs to be an unwed pregnant mother. So my mother went through a lot of turmoil even just with that. And obviously she was an oldest child as well. So we got to give grace to even my grandmother and my grandfather. Like, you never know what to do, what the right thing is to do, especially with your first child. You never know what to do with your last child as far as that goes. I mean, parenting is a very hard situation. So when I'm telling you this story, I want you to know that I am not saying anything trying to be negative about my family, because I love my family and would never change anything about it. But this is my story, and I know that God had reasons for how this story worked. The devil would maybe want it for bad, but God turned it into good. And that's the way I look at it. But so continuing on, my mother was they tried to get my mother to give up me, like going to a camp for unwed mothers and giving me up. And my mom fought for me very, very hard and did not. And apparently my father fought right along. And I was the only one that got to be at their wedding. Picture. But yes, they got married because of me, and they were so in love. They were so happy when I was born. I have pictures of me as a baby, and they were just thrilled. Young parents, and I have these amazing black and white pictures of me with my parents, and it's just awesome. And then later on with my sister and so forth. But that was the beginning of the story as far as how I became about, but I still did not feel like I belonged. And they made it out to be a bad thing. In fact, I remember okay, well, no, I'm Indian, which, okay, correct me wrong. I don't want to hear any things about how I'm saying anything correct or incorrect or whatever. This is just how we talked back then, okay? But as an American Indian, Native American, however you want to say it, that's what I would say. I'm like, and they're like, oh, well, we don't like that either. We're cowboys. That's how they would say it. I'm like, okay, well, that's not that. So then I would say, oh, I'm Hawaiian. And then it was kind of like, oh, that's kind of neat. So they would accept it. Like, I had to think up stuff, bleep, of what I was, because I had my identity was just so off. I was like, okay, why do people pay so much attention to what I look like? And I remember, then we finally moved to, in my third grade, we moved to another small town, Wallace, Nebraska, by the way, which is where I graduated. Great town, okay? We had a good time there. 350 people, very small town. And my classmates, I believe to this day, all 19 of us are still alive and going. And I shout out to my 80s classmates. And I went to third grade there, and they accepted me. I don't know what it was, but I didn't get the harassment. I was asked what I was, but never harassed about it. So I was very thankful. So when I got to third grade, things started to go a little bit better for me. And I felt a lot more accepted and a lot more loved there. And so that was a good thing. So it was probably then that I started feeling a little bit more confident and feeling good about myself. And then we went into middle school, which was probably my best times and my best years. And then we went into high school, and things turned sour. So then when in high school, when I was 14, I was raped. Back then they would have called it a date rape, but it wasn't a date necessarily, but it was, let's just say that I thought it was my fault for a long time at 14 years old, mind you. Losing your virginity to a rape is completely screws you up your whole idea of what a relationship, sex, all that stuff really is, right? So I had no idea what happened to me. and kids don't know it. Like a lot of times when kids are suffering and things like that, they don't even know what's wrong, and they become like your goth person or whatever, and that's kind of what I was. I got very, very depressed and ended up being a very rebellious child. And I came from, because I came from this town that was very preppy, maybe. I mean, we were very good in sports and very smart. I mean, I was very intelligent as well. But I kind of like, with all that, somehow underneath of it, got very, very depressed and started getting in with the wrong crowd, not in my town, but in another town that I found that I related to better, that I thought I related to better or whatever. But it's probably because we were all hurt people. So I went from being, by my looks, to how I acted, and maybe looks as well. I was, wear the Counts shirts, really thick black eyeliner, did a lot of stuff like nowadays they would say is like, I mean, I used to cut myself with a razor and write things on me with a razor. And nowadays, they call it cutting, and it's like people don't understand, like even tattoos, like why people get tattoos, the pain is like, because there's pain that you get from that's releasing, and not everybody understands that. They look at that as like something evil or demonic or whatever. But I started to understand it more later in life. But at the time, I didn't know it was. I just knew again, I did not belong. My identity, what the heck? I was like, I didn't belong with anybody. I didn't. In fact, in school, and I'm not, again, trying to put anything bad, but I was very bullied in high school. And not just by the kids. I was bullied by teachers and adults. I wasn't real athletic at all. I was definitely the last picked in the gym. My parents weren't like people who were like very athletic or... I mean, my dad, I think, was really athletic, actually. But it's not something that they pursued, or like, we didn't like watch sports, or even though I was a very huge Dallas Cowboys fan at age 5, because I was going to be a Dallas Cowboy cheerleader, but besides the point. It wasn't like we did a lot of sports stuff. I remember my dad, he wanted me to play baseball. That was his big thing. He was left-handed. I remember, bless his heart, he bought me a left-handed glove. I'm right-handed, okay? I can do some things both ways. Like I can play pool left-handed. That's because I was taught left-handed. But, I learned not sports to be anything big. So I wasn't very coordinated. So because I was not coordinated, in small towns, that's, the teachers with the coaches and blah, blah, blah. And so I was made fun of a lot because I looked a little goth, and I was a little dark, and I went and partied, and I smoked. I would go in my little Volkswagen and put some, blankets or towels or whatever in the window during lunch break. And I'd smoke in the school parking lot. Me and my friends, or one of my friends, that she knows who you are. And she was lost like I was too. But that's what it was. We were just lost. We were just lost people. And I don't know what exactly happened. I actually got so bullied one time during a class period in history, I remember. And I'm not kidding you. It was, when I look back at it, it was just unbelievably wrong. And to think that it went on, but it did. And I forgive everybody. It's not that big of a deal now, but it makes me who I was, or who I am. But I quit school. And okay, this is a funny thing, because nowadays, remember in home ec, in the 80s, remember how we did it? Okay, now they have a baby. They have an actual baby, like, that cries, and you have to pick it up and all this stuff. Well, we had flour. We had a 5-pound bag of flour that we put a little picture on, and that was our baby. Well, I was in the middle of that. And that's when I quit school. I remember I went and quit school. I had my baby flour, and I walked home to school because my Volkswagen half the time didn't run because the brakes weren't working. But another story. But anyway, I told my mom, I'm like, and by that time, I'd gotten into a lot of trouble anyways. I was a lot of trouble for my parents. I'd been on a high-speed car chase. I was drinking and driving, and had stolen my mom and dad's car. And that was at age 15. Mind you, I was I had gotten into a lot of trouble. And so my parents didn't know what to do with me. You know, it was hard. I was their first child. And for my dad, it was like him looking at, at himself in the mirror. Like we were both like the same person, and they loved me, but they didn't know what to do with me. So, I told my mom I was going to quit school, and she was like, she said she understood and she was okay with that. And so I was going to quit school, but not going to cry. This, from the time I was like 14 on, I used to work at this restaurant called the Fat Sisters Cafe. And I loved it. I started out washing dishes and then waited tables or whatever. But one of the gals who owned it was also the secretary at school. And she would come over to my house every day and tell me, Michelle, you need to go back to school. You need to go back to school. Because she believed in me. And she did it enough times that I finally went back to school. And it was, I don't know, I don't remember if it was a month later after I had quit. So it wasn't like I quit for a very long time, but she talked me into it and I went back. And I'm so glad she did. And it was so nice to have somebody who was a Christian woman who believed in me. And not that my parents didn't believe me. They knew I was very capable of doing it, but they just didn't know what to do, And so anyway, she talked me back to school. I went back to school. And then finally, my senior year, I really hit it hard. I just tried to keep everybody out of my head and think I'm okay, And I was an artist at the time, an artist and a writer. And I just kind of threw myself into that stuff. And I got scholarships for my art and was able to go to college full ride. To the colleges, the community college. It was just a community college, but it was like, that was a big thing for me. So great, So I went to school, went to college, and on my art scholarships, but I didn't have to have a major in art. I was going to go into business with a minor in Spanish. I took a lot of years in Spanish and so forth. And I graduated third in my class. Okay, I know there was only 19 in my class, but third, and I even tried to quit school. Like, I wasn't stupid, okay? I actually was the person that they would say, Michelle, can you write a paper for me? And I would do it. I was really good at it. I was not good at math. English, I wasn't good at when it came to the grammar part. I was really good at writing, but it wasn't like I was stupid, by all means, or nobody's stupid. It's just that everybody learns a little bit different is the way I look at it. I was just a lost soul, in a lot of different ways. And so I graduated from high school, went to college for a little bit. And in my senior year, I had met my now ex-husband. And 9 months after that we had met, I was in college, I got pregnant. And this was with somebody who didn't think she could ever get pregnant, but here we go. And I had been praying and looking up. I was one of those silly girls that would pray and look at the stars, and I'd see a shooting star, and I just wish for somebody who looked like me. I want a baby that loves me unconditionally and looks like me. I literally would say that and pray for that and wish upon a star on that. So when I found out I was pregnant, I was ecstatic. And didn't think that my relationship was going to last. I didn't think it was going to be something, but I was scared about that, but I was okay with that because I was like, I'm going to have a human being that loves me and looks like me. That's what I was so thrilled about. And of course, my mom and dad were super excited. And then my then husband, boyfriend, then later husband, he ended up being excited about it as well. So it all worked out at the time. But I had her and Kayla, and because I had a lot of complications, unfortunately, I ended up leaving college. I did not finish, but I became a mom at 19 years old. And she was bald. She didn't have any hair. She didn't necessarily look like me, but that wasn't my thought at all. I just had this beautiful human being that I was so in love with, and that she loved me unconditionally. Like, it was just like, I always called her my little angel. And, we had her, and then another long story, but my ex-husband now, we found out a week later that he had a son, and then we found out a month later he had a daughter. So boom, in a month's time, we had 3 children. But anyway, we love them all so dearly. And it was great, because it was awesome going on a drive and having 3 car seats in the back seat, and one starts crying, and then the other one cries, and the next one cries, and then trying to change diapers for 3 children. It was a little crazy bit of a time, but God gave me some sort of crazy wanting and yearning and patience to be stepmom and mom and bring them together, to see them as siblings and have each other. Like, it was an amazing time. As the years went by, it got more and more difficult, but I will tell you, it was worth everything. Like, everything that has made me grow was from those children, and I'm very blessed to have them in my life. But regardless, so in the meantime, we had those kids, and so forth, and things went on, and 11 years later, I had finally got another child, and Lexi, and she's 11 years younger than my first birth baby. And then, in between that, after Lexi was born, my daughter Kayla, my oldest one, birth baby, she was in pageants and stuff like that, which I was really against, because I was not a pageanty type person. I was kind of a tomboy. I had to look cute, but I was a tomboy. I was one of those girls that played football with the boys and, war, we would, go and play war or whatever. But I had to look cute at the same time. Like, I wouldn't go check the mail unless I had my makeup on and my hair, all 80s blown out, But I was kind of a tomboy. I wasn't prissy at all. And so everything I thought about with pageants was like John Benet Ramsey, and that made me scared, But Kayla, for whatever reason, really wanted to be in these pageants. And it ended up being a really great thing for her, because these particular ones gave her a lot of confidence and so forth. But anyway, Lexi, the one that was 11 years younger, we'd bring her along with baby, and we were doing this, I don't remember, a mother-daughter thing on stage with me and Kayla, and they're like, wow, you guys look like twins. And let's see, she would have been probably 11 or 12 years old, I suppose. And it was the first time I realized she did. Because for a long time, like I said, she didn't even have hair till she was like 2.5. The poor kids, I had earrings in her and everything. They call her a boy. Or they would tell me, oh my gosh, does she have leukemia? I'm like, no. But anyway, when she bloomed and had her hair, and all of a sudden they were like, she looked like me. And I was like, oh, thank you, God. I have someone in this life that looks like me. And it was an amazing feeling to know. And I'm sorry if I'm getting a little emotional. I'm trying to make this fun. I got to have some fillers of stories, okay? But anyway, it was an amazing moment in my life to feel like I identified with somebody. So, and then also too, Lexi also, when she was born, she had the dark hair and everything, and she looked like me. All my kids on after, they do look like me. They look like their father, but you can tell they're my children. And it's an amazing feeling to feel like you had that identity and so forth. So anyway, we had kids, more kids or whatever. And like I said in the last podcast, it was always a joke. I was always pregnant, having all these kids, having, pregnant double stroller, and kids walking beside me, and kids riding bikes. I was just like the mama duck with her little hens, or ducklings or whatever. But it was a great time in my life. And I would never take it back. And we used to go on these long walks together, and I just get to be able to talk with them and be in nature and just feel overwhelmingly blessed to have these human beings that looked, even my stepchildren looked like me. They looked more like me than they did their father. My stepson was half Hispanic. So their dad, his dad is very white. And so I looked more like him than their dad. And then my stepdaughter, she is half Native American. And so again, I looked more like her than their dad. So I had all these kids that I identified with. And it was an amazing feeling, again, to feel so like you felt like you connected. So they were and they are my everything. So then as days go on, much later in life, my dad had got lung cancer. And it was when I first moved to Lincoln. And it really first started out like he had a backache and I didn't know what was wrong. Well, they found out later that there was cancer in there. Well, it had started out in his lung. And a week later, after he found out he had cancer, he had unfortunately passed away. Thank God for FaceTime, because I was trying to race there from Lincoln, Nebraska down to Rapid City, South Dakota to try to get to him before he passed away. And we were able to FaceTime him, or I was able to FaceTime him, and I could tell it was probably the last time I was going to see him. But, he was, from that generation, guys didn't say I love you very often, Dad told me he loved me when he'd been drinking a little much. That's about all. I knew he was proud of me. He was always proud of my sports in my, in powerlifting and being an IFBB Bikini Pro bodybuilder. He was one of my biggest fans, he really was. And in that time, he made me really feel supported and loved. But he didn't say I love you very often. But in that moment before he passed away, he told me in the most genuine way how much he loved me, which meant a lot because it was just a couple, probably 4 years or 5 years before that I had I had thought I had dealt with my rape and everything, in my mind. I had told my kids about it and everything, and that's why I told them, don't judge people by the way they act, because there's probably something behind it that you don't even understand. Don't ever be mean to people that are the goth look or whatever. You don't know what they went through, and they just need love, okay? Don't be mean to them. Don't make fun of them, because I knew how that felt. My kids grew up differently, so they never felt that kind of pressure of any sort. So I had to teach that to them. So I always told them the story of that. So I thought I was okay with it. Well, one time on Facebook, the person who raped me happened to be friends with some people that I knew, and his picture popped up. And for whatever reason, and this was I would have been in my 40s or so. Yeah. His picture popped up and I got triggered, and it brought some emotions that I never felt before. And I remember closing the Facebook and the next morning opening it up, and I hadn't even brought it up, but his face popped up again. And it immediately triggered something horrible. Well, I guess there's such thing as post-traumatic, like later on having a PTSD. And that's what happened, I guess. And I had never told anybody about what had happened to me except for my now ex-husband. He was the only one that ever knew. I never told anybody about it. And I decided to tell my parents. Well, it was a rough time in a lot of ways, and I can be stubborn about a lot of things, and I understand, and I can be dramatic too at times. I know I can, but I don't know what happened for sure. But when I told my parents, all of a sudden they quit talking to me, And I didn't know exactly, there was a lot of other stuff going on in our family. And I didn't quite understand exactly what was going on. And it was even drove me more crazy. I mean, it literally, I can easily make myself be the more crazy person because I'm trying to over tell my story, I guess, or I don't know. But I knew I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't understand what happened. Keep that in mind because it will make more sense later. But literally there was probably a couple years there where I did not talk to my family. And I didn't understand what had happened. But later, like I said, but we're fast forward again to when my dad passed away, probably about a year later, my mother passed away. And I took care of her on her deathbed. And all she ever told me was, Michelle, I fought so hard for you. The last few days of my mother's life were the most amazing. I found out how much I was exactly like her. But she was, she was a character. Like when she was dying, she was like, you'd think she was about to die. And she's like, Michelle. I'm like, what? Can you please vacuum the rug? I'm like, oh my gosh, Mother. Yes, I'll vacuum the rug for you, Mom. But she would be always talking in her last breath of something like that. Oh my goodness. I love her so much. And I love the times we sat there and we watched Days of Our Lives at noon. And that was something she's always done. And that's why my first daughter's name is Kayla and Patch. 80s friends, you know what I'm talking about. But then, so we were able to have that time together or whatever, but she never said anything about, other than that she just fought really hard for me, which I knew she did. I think my grandmother always felt bad that she would try to get my mom to give me up for adoption or whatever, or abortion. I don't know exactly everything she was trying to get her to do, but because my grandma would always secretly even tell me, you're my favorite granddaughter. I'm sorry, all my other, cousins out there, but she did. Sorry, she passed away since, but I'm sure she just felt bad and was trying to feel better about maybe some of the decisions she made, and I forgive all my family, of course, for all that. And I mean, we're all human. We don't always know what we're saying or doing, we have to give everybody grace on some of these things. Nobody gives us a blueprint of what life should be like. The Bible is about the only thing we've got, and even that cannot completely straightforward tell us exactly what we need to do as a human being. So after that all happened, probably I don't know, maybe a couple years after that, I suppose, my daughter, Kayla, decided to do, then the DNA test came out. And she's like, I'm going to do a DNA test, And so she did it. And she found out she was, had a quarter Asian. I'm like, we knew it. We knew there had to be some Asian in us somewhere. I knew it, and I didn't know how those gene tests worked really well. I did not have any clue. I thought the gene tests were something that, like me and my sisters, all three could be from the same parents and have a different amount of German, Asian, Irish, you know what I mean? It could be very all over the place. I didn't understand how that worked. So she does that, and I'm like, okay, I'm excited, I'm gonna do it. And my daughter just kept saying, well, just be careful, Mom. I'm like, what? It's not a big deal, It's not a big deal. So I was 49, I believe, when I did this test. And so mind you, this hasn't been that long ago, after my parents have passed away. But so I did my DNA test. I got it back. I was 50.1% Asian. And then the other half was like Irish and Swedish, European stuff. But I was 50.1 Asian. And my matches, which I knew one of my uncles from my dad's side is very big into DNA and all that stuff, and he had already done the test. Well, I didn't match up with him. It's like, huh, I don't understand, you know. It's like, what's going on, you know? And I'm looking and I'm like, I'm not related to anybody on my dad's side. Like, I'm not matching up to anybody. I don't, like, what's going on here, you know? And then all of a sudden, everything from the time I was a kindergartner, of being made fun of, Chinese, Japanese, dirty knees, look at these, started haunting back at me. Losing my dad started haunting back to me. I remember calling my aunt, and this is my aunt that, she's not my blood aunt. She was married to my dad. I remember asking my aunt about the whole situation. And that, mind you, this is probably one of my favorite aunts, and she's amazing. I said, why am I not, is there something that I don't know? And she said, well, Michelle, there was a question about it. Because your father was out combining when your mom would have gotten pregnant when she was in Vermont. Well, she didn't say that in Vermont, but that's when it was at that time. But nobody loved me any less. She's like, Michelle, you're a clap. It's okay. And to be honest, and my sisters will attest to this, that I'm probably more like that family than my other two sisters. Or just a little gruff, I guess you could say. A little gruff, maybe some passionate stubbornness. Yeah. I mean, not that my sisters don't have that stuff too, but I'm just saying that I seem to have a little bit more of it. They'd agree with me. But anyway, and I remember her writing the most beautiful letter to me that meant so much to me, to remind me that I was very loved and accepted by my father and my mother, and that they really believed I was theirs. On the flip side, I think this is what happened. I don't really know what happened, and I don't know that it needs to know what happened, but my guess is that when my mom was in Vermont and my dad was combining and they were in love talking back and forth, that my mother may have been raped. I don't know that for a fact, but when I think back at conversations that occurred as I was growing up about just different things, and the fact that when I told them about my rape, they kind of shut down for a while, it makes sense to me. It may have been the first time that maybe my dad really questioned if I was his. And my mom probably maybe had a post-traumatic stress about what happened when she got pregnant with me. Because I guarantee you she never dealt with it. And from what I can gather, she never told anybody. And if anybody out there does know anything, I want to know. Like, I deserve to know what happened. And it doesn't matter. Like, I've talked to some family and they act like, it doesn't matter, Michelle. You know, it's like, that's you. I want to know, you know? And I completely have no hard feelings on anybody. Even if my biological father did rape my mother, I still forgive him. Like, I don't know exactly what the scenario is, but there's no room for hate in my heart. I can have it for a little bit, but it's never a long lasting. I know the difference between hate and just disconnecting myself from a situation so that I don't become like that, you know, like, or bitter or anything like that. Like, it's just easier sometimes to disconnect than just to be mad or hateful or resentful, you know, or some people really like to be vindictive and things like that. Well, that's not me. That's in fact, I have this tattoo here. I got that's love. That means love, because it's in Chinese. Because I know that obviously my father was 100% Asian, and I may never know who he is. It's kind of funny. I found a I found a first cousin. We were hoping that maybe we were half sisters or something, but upon looking in more into it, we probably are more like cousins. Like her dad and my dad were probably brothers. She knew a little bit more about her father. She never met him or anything like that, but it was one of those deals where he was her mom, back then it was very embarrassing to be an unwed mother, so whatever the situation was, she signed her checks as Mrs. Lee. So apparently it was a Lee, and I don't know if that was just an Americanized name or what. His name was John Lee, I think, is what my cousin had said. And it was on her birth certificate that was the father. And all she knew about him was that he was an engineer student in Oklahoma that lived in, I think she said, Thailand. And that's the only connection I have right now. And I haven't ever got to meet her, and I would love to meet her, but I am connected to her and her daughter. And it's so crazy because her daughter looks a lot like my daughter, my first daughter, Kayla. They both had that. I don't know if she has some Irish in her, maybe too, or something. But they're so sweet. And we both have tried to do some investigating to try to see if we could find anything. And not because I don't know if she had any father figures or not, but I definitely had the best father figure, and I don't need another father. Like I have the best father in my life that I ever had, and that's all I need. I just would like to know a little bit more about my culture, my bloodline, my background. That's all. Especially where it's a completely different culture, And her, it had affected my life all this time. It's like identity. Remember, it's like you want to identify. Like I identify with my father and my mother and my sisters and my family very much, but to be able to kind of look at your bloodline is something that some people just don't understand unless they were the person. And so it's different for them, I mean, I remember growing up, looking at prejudice and things like that, it's like, I remember back then, I remember there was a black family. Well, they were adopted from a white family, and there was a couple black kids that would used to come over and play, and I didn't think anything different of it. Like they came over and play, and then all of a sudden there'd be other kids that come over and play. We were always the yard that everybody used to come and play at, and some parents would come pick up their kids when they saw these black kids, and I remember. Because my parents were far from prejudice. I never even knew what that meant at any time. It wasn't in my realm, And they sat me down and told me, well, there's some people who have a problem with different color skin. And I was like, what? So I was very blessed to never see color that way, even though I felt that way sometimes, not color, but just looks, it's identity. But I think that, people make a big deal about race. The thing of it is in reality, this happens no matter what. No, if you just look different, it does not matter about race. I think that people need to get off that kick a bit, because I grew up half Asian, not knowing it, and I realized that it had more to do with just looking different. Okay, bullying happens. It doesn't matter what race you are. It doesn't matter if you're white, if you're black, or you're Asian, whatever. People get bullied. So there's prejudice, bullying, whatever you want to call it, in all directions, and it just happens. But regardless, I probably will never find it. I mean, it'd be awesome if I could find some sort of family. I don't know if, my chances are that my real father, or I shouldn't say father, my biological father, he could be gone by now, but I would assume that, back then what they would do is there was a war going on in Asia, is what somebody told me, and then they'd come to the States, they would go to school, and they went back, and then they had their families and so forth, and things like that. So they don't do DNA tests in other cultures. Americans are the only ones that really do that stuff, because we're a melting pot. We're a melting pot of all kinds of cultures. Well, you go to Africa or Asia or whatever, they're not going to do that because they know what they are. That's not a question. So the chances of me ever figuring that out are pretty null, but it'd be really cool. I know that my cousin Thalia, she would also agree that it would be just neat to know if we identify with anyone and just know something about our family. I mean, we don't, just even health-wise about our family and just things that maybe might be helpful for our family. She's, I think she's like 5 years older than me, you know, but we just kind of had the same little story. And it's kind of weird that we're the only two that happen to be that way. And we happen to be cousins, probably first cousins, you know, as far as the DNA tests go or whatever, but it's okay. You know, I am happy of who I am. I know that God put me here for a reason. You know, that's why there's no mistakes. I will beg to differ with anyone who thinks that they're a mistake or, you know, my parents didn't want me and, you know, but I'm here or whatever. It's like, I'm sorry, but your parents don't have that much power. Your parents don't have power. God has way more power. He can decide when and what he wants to be on this earth. And he wanted every single one of you. He wanted me on this earth. We have a special purpose, whether you were because of a rape, because of a mistake, because of a one-night stand. God doesn't make mistakes. And I know that I have a purpose here, and that is one reason why I've been fighting very hard to get out of the hole that I've been in for a few years, or just traveling through life and like, what is the next road? What am I supposed to be doing? Like, there is a purpose, and I've got to make sure I do that purpose, you know? And I think the biggest thing is to show love and acceptance, no matter what. There's no room for hate. Love will cover everything. Well, that was my long story that I didn't realize how long I talked. I didn't mean for it to be this long. I really didn't. But I want you guys to get a little background about me before we get moving on to some of our guests and so forth. And plus, this is a great time for me to figure out all this technology stuff, which I already had a little problem with my phone dying, whatever. So hopefully this all can edit back together. But anyway, you know, talk to me. Let me know about your identity. What's your story? Like, you know, back in the 80s, things were different. I've met a few people. The lady who does my nails, she has the same story. Her husband has the same story. Like, it's so crazy because I think since those DNA tests have come out, there's been a lot of little surprises about, ooh, that's not my dad, blah, 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 whatever. I mean, it's something that's pretty common anymore. And now you can't get away with it because there is the DNA test, you know? Regardless, it just goes to prove that we are so much more than we realize, and that creation is beyond what we know. And we can sit there and think we have control of what we do or what we say or what we, you know, we do have control of those things, but I'm just saying that there's so much a bigger power here that has some sort of, he has an idea, he has a purpose, he has things that he wants in place, and he put us each there to do that purpose. And so it's important that we understand that. You know, he knows every hair on our head, or the hair that you used to have on your head for some of you. But anyway, I didn't mean to make it very so sad a story. But again, I just wanted you to know a little background on me. And we'll try to come back with a little bit more happier story next time. But we'll end for now. Thank you for joining me. Sorry it was a little longer. Again, the 80s ain't dead yet. And I'm your host, Michelle Rockstar Steele. See you next time.